Hey everyone, and welcome back to Whispers in the Dark. It's your host Alex, here to share another tale of supernatural horror and chilling mystery. How are you all doing tonight? I hope you're all healthy, happy, and finding success in whatever you do. And for tonight's story, I'm taking you deep into America's heartland for a story called The Girl in the Cornfield. Before we get into it, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our latest tales from the shadows. Okay, let's turn down the lights and get started. In a small town in the Midwest, a place of sprawling fields and endless skies, lived a bright young woman named Chloe. She was known by everyone in the tight-knit community as a cheerful and spirited girl. Chloe lived with her parents in a modest house on the edge of town, surrounded by the vast cornfields that stretched for miles, many of which belonged to the family of her good friend, Jake. Besides Jake, Chloe had three other close male friends, Ryan, Mike, and Ben. They had been an inseparable group since they were kids, spending their time together whether it was helping out on the farms, swimming in the local creek, or just hanging out under the old oak tree in the town square. Every weekend, they would often venture into the vast cornfields owned by Jake's family. To them, it wasn't just a farm, it was a boundless kingdom for running and playing, a world of their own, far from the watchful eyes of adults. Lately, however, Chloe had noticed a change in their behavior, especially Jake's. The boy who was once warm and friendly had started acting differently. He'd become possessive, his gaze lingering on Chloe in a way that made her uncomfortable. Ryan, Mike, and Ben also began treating Chloe with a strange distance, a shift she couldn't quite explain. Though Chloe tried to ignore the anxious feeling growing inside her, it was always there. One afternoon, as they were all gathered under the big oak tree near Jake's house, he suggested they go to a more distant part of the cornfield, a section rarely visited by anyone. "Hey, let's head out to the far section of the fields," Jake said with a wide smile. "We can have some fun out there without anyone bothering us." Chloe hesitated. "But why so far out? That place seems really isolated from town, doesn't it?" she asked, the anxiety in her heart starting to take hold. But Jake was persuasive. "Don't worry, we're all friends. You'll be safe." Ryan and Ben quickly agreed with Jake's idea, urging Chloe to come along. They all reassured her that it was just a casual, fun trip. With mixed feelings of anxiety and curiosity, Chloe finally agreed. She felt it would be awkward to refuse her friends, especially since they had known each other for so long and had always looked out for one another. The four of them set off towards the remote cornfield. The journey was long, taking them down a narrow dirt path overgrown with weeds. A gentle breeze carried the sweet, earthy scent of corn, but Chloe still felt that something was off. The farther they walked, the quieter their surroundings became, until the only sound was the crunch of their own footsteps, swallowed by the immense silence of the fields. Chloe was a little worried, but she tried to remain calm, reminding herself of their promise not to make things awkward. When they finally reached the distant, secluded part of the field, the atmosphere felt even more unsettling. There were no houses or other people in sight. They were completely alone, hidden by towering stalks of corn that blocked the view in every direction. In the middle of this dense field, they stopped and sat down in a small clearing, far from any prying eyes. The wind, which had been a gentle whisper, now began to blow harder, rustling the corn leaves and creating a sound like hushed, urgent whispers. Chloe felt a definite sense of dread, but she tried not to overthink it. Jake, seeming more and more excited, suggested they play a more interesting game. "Come on, let's try something more exciting than just talking." Ryan, Mike, and Ben all seemed to agree, but Chloe noticed something odd in their expressions. She looked at their faces, one by one, seeing a look she'd never seen before, especially in Jake. "Are you guys sure you want to play out here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, but her friends just laughed, assuring her that everything would be fine. With a growing sense of unease, Chloe went along with them, unaware that the cornfield they had entered was not a safe place. It was a place that would change their lives forever. After the long walk, they had finally arrived at a spot far from any sign of civilization, deep within the dense cornfield. The atmosphere, which had started out cheerful and full of energy, began to sour as the sun beat down relentlessly. All around them were towering rows of corn, seeming to swallow the path they had taken, making the cornfield feel like a world completely detached from reality. "Come on, Chloe, let's play something different," Jake said, his voice a little hoarse. as if there was something hidden behind his words. Chloe felt the tension in the air thicken. The once relaxed mood was now terrifying. Mike, Ryan, and Ben no longer looked like her familiar friends. Their faces were more serious, and there was a strange glint in their eyes. Chloe sensed something was deeply wrong, and that feeling intensified as they all began to stare at her differently. "Why are you all looking at me like that?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. She tried to stay calm, but fear began to betray her. Jake smiled, but it was a different kind of smile, full of a meaning Chloe couldn't comprehend. "Nothing's wrong, Chloe. We just want to have a little more fun." With a sense of dread, Chloe reluctantly decided to ignore her instincts and join in the game they proposed. But every step she took felt heavier. She glanced nervously at the tall stalks of corn, which seemed to be watching her with unseen eyes, adding to the suffocating tension. Suddenly, Jake stopped walking and turned around. He said in a low tone, "We've decided to do something special, something that will make all of us satisfied." Chloe was shocked by his words. A terrible realization dawned on her, and she screamed, trying to run, but the four boys were too fast. In an instant, they had her, holding her down, forcing her to stay. "Please, let me go. Don't do this," Chloe screamed, but her cries only echoed through the silent cornfield, lost among the dense leaves that seemed to close in around them, sealing them off from the rest of the world. Mike and Ryan held Chloe's arms, while Ben and Jake began to tear at her clothes, one piece at a time. Chloe fought with all her strength, but the power of her friends was too great. Mike, Ryan, Ben, and Jake, the boys she had considered her closest friends, had transformed into strangers, filled with a malicious intent she couldn't understand. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The vast, quiet cornfield became the silent witness to an unforgivable act. Chloe screamed until her voice gave out, but her cries were swallowed by the oppressive silence. The assault seemed to last for hours. When it was finally over, her body was broken, and her spirit was gone. Her life was taken from her by the very people she had trusted as her truest friends. Afterward, an eerie silence fell, broken only by the rustling of the cornstalks in the wind. The four boys stood there, staring at Chloe's lifeless body on the ground, powerless. They were shocked by what had just happened, but the chilling silence was now filled with something else. Instead of seeking help or admitting their crime, they panicked. They ran, but not before deciding to hide their monstrous act. They dug a large, shallow hole right there, between the rows of corn where no one would ever know. They made a pact to never speak of what happened again. As dusk settled, Chloe's body was buried in the dark, lonely cornfield. But even as they tried to ignore the reality of what they had done, a deep-seated fear and regret would continue to haunt them, waiting for the right moment to claim what was owed. Something dark had begun, and it was far from over. After that horrific event, Jake and his friends tried to forget. Their stomachs churned, and they were consumed by an unspeakable guilt. They had buried Chloe in a hastily dug grave in the field, where no one knew but the four of them. But even though they tried to move on, guilt and fear never left them. Their nights were filled with nightmares, and a tension settled into every interaction they had. Every gust of wind, every strange noise, reminded them of that day. They constantly felt as if they were being watched. Days turned into weeks, but Chloe's body was never found. Her family searched frantically throughout the town, but no clue led them to the cornfield. They questioned Chloe's friends, but the boys all played dumb, feigning ignorance and sadness. Chloe's family was devastated. Her mother cried constantly, praying for the return of her missing daughter. But the cornfield held its terrible secret. Soon, the cornfield became a place of fear for the townspeople. Whispers started to spread about Chloe's restless spirit haunting the fields. People who passed by at night claimed to hear the sound of a young woman crying. That was Chloe's spirit. The stories made the villagers even more afraid, and many avoided the cornfield after dark. It wasn't just crying that people heard. Sometimes, they would see a white figure darting between the tall stalks of corn. Her spirit whispered into the ears of those who dared to get too close, saying that this was her revenge. She felt she had something to settle. Even though she was still filled with fear, she approached the cornfield. The wind began to howl, making the cornstalks sway violently, as if trying to drive her away. Her heart pounded, and her body felt rigid, but she kept walking. In the middle of the dark cornfield, Jake suddenly felt like someone was following him. The footsteps were quiet, like a shadow moving with his every step. He spun around, but there was no one there, only an unnerving silence. As he walked faster, he felt a cold hand touch his back. Jake turned, and there she was, Chloe, her face twisted with a hatred he had never seen before. She was gone, but he felt an immense rage radiating from her as he looked at her. In his heart, he knew it was Chloe, her spirit now wandering, seeking justice. With his body trembling, Jake slowly backed away, but her image followed his every step. She didn't say a word, just stared at him with pure vengeance. As the darkness deepened, a whisper carried on the wind, clear and chilling. "Jake," the voice said. It sounded soft yet terrifying. Jake broke into a run, trying to escape the cornfield, but the figure kept pace with him. As soon as he reached the edge of the field, she vanished into the night, leaving Jake in a state of profound terror. He scrambled back to his house, but the image of Chloe, whose body had never been found, remained seared into his mind. His fear grew stronger, and he knew that he and his friends would have to face what they had done, but they didn't yet know that their reckoning was coming, and Chloe, though gone, would never be forgotten. The once peaceful town was now filled with fear. People started talking more about the crying sounds coming from the cornfield, and at night, a sense of dread hung over everything. Jake's guilt deepened, realizing that Chloe's spirit might have risen to demand revenge. Time passed, but the four boys found no peace. Though they tried to forget the horrific incident in the cornfield, a deepening fear continued to haunt them. Every night, they felt something lurking, or heard footsteps following them from an unknown source. When they were in a quiet place, the air would suddenly turn cold, and soft whispers would often be heard when they were alone. It was the sound of Chloe's crying, and it kept them from sleeping soundly. They all felt that something was wrong, something bigger and more malevolent than they could have imagined. One night, after a long day, Mike woke up in the middle of his sleep. He felt as if something had disturbed him, an unexplainable presence. His body felt stiff, and the air in his room was intensely cold. He heard a soft voice, as if someone was calling his name. The voice came from nearby, almost a whisper in his ear. It was a familiar tone, yet filled with a profound sadness. Mike slowly opened his eyes, and in that instant, his heart nearly stopped. Standing before him was a figure, ethereal but disturbingly real. It was Chloe, the girl who had once been his friend, but she looked nothing like the person he knew. Her eyes were empty, like black pits ready to swallow him whole. Though no sound came from her lips, her gaze spoke more than words ever could. Mike felt choked by a fear so immense that his body trembled. Unable to move, Chloe stepped closer, her steps light, almost silent on the wooden floor of Mike's house. "Why are you so quiet, Mike?" Chloe's whispered voice echoed in his ears, seeming to come from within him. "You know what happened. You know who killed me." Mike could only stare with wide eyes. I don't know," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Suddenly, her face contorted with rage, and the whispering voice became louder, more menacing. "Liar! You were there!" The terror became unbearable, and Mike finally screamed. With a jolt, he sat up in bed, panicked and gasping for air. He looked around, but there was nothing. His room was empty, the only sound the frantic beating of his own heart. But the fear didn't go away. He knew what he had just experienced was not just a dream. It was a warning. Chloe's spirit had risen. He sat on his bed, trying to calm himself, but the image of Chloe's hate-filled face lingered in his mind. There was no doubt left in him. Chloe had come to demand revenge. All the guilt he had tried to bury was now surfacing, reminding them one by one that they could not escape reality. As Mike tried to steady himself, the sound of footsteps was heard again in the hallway of his house. The steps were slow, but felt so close, as if they were approaching, unstoppable. Mike looked at his door, frozen. Was it Chloe? Was she coming back? Suddenly, Mike's bedroom door creaked open slowly, and in the doorway stood a dark, hate-filled shadow. But this time, the voice came from a different direction, as if it was coming from inside Mike's own body. "I am inside you now," it whispered. He didn't know what to do. He knew that Chloe would not let them get away with what they had done. What happened in the cornfield had been unearthed. Chloe would not let them go so easily. The next day, Mike, anxious and terrified by what he had experienced, decided to tell his friends Jake, Ryan, and Ben. They all sat in a booth at the local diner, a place where they usually gathered to talk about trivial things. But this time, A heavy tension made their conversation uncomfortable. "I don't know where to start," Mike said, his voice still shaking. "Last night, I saw Chloe, her ghost. She came to my room. She knows what happened." He went on to describe the pale, vengeful figure, the whispers that called his name and threatened him. But Jake, Ryan, and Ben just looked at each other doubtfully. "It must have been a nightmare," Jake said dismissively. "You know, we've all been stressed about what happened. It's probably just our guilt playing tricks on us. We're all anxious, man, but don't let fear get to you." "Chloe's gone," Ryan added, trying to sound reassuring. "Maybe you're just overthinking things, Mike." "It's not that weird for us to be having bad dreams," Ben chimed in. Mike felt cornered. He knew what he saw was not a dream, but seeing his friend's reactions, he tried to rationalize it. But deep down, Mike could feel that something was terribly wrong. As days passed, that feeling only grew stronger. The strange occurrences became more frequent and more terrifying for all of them. The haunting was no longer just a feeling. It was real. Objects in their homes began to fall on their own, as if moved by an unseen hand. Doors they had locked would be found wide open minutes later, and most terrifyingly, they all began to hear a familiar crying sound, faint at first, then growing louder, though there was never anyone there. It was Chloe's cry, haunting them. The longer it went on, the louder the crying became, sounding closer each time, like a spirit searching for something, or rather, searching for them. One night, as Mike was sleeping, he was awakened by the same whisper. "Mike, you all have to pay for what you did to me. You have to pay." The voice echoed again, so close to his ear that it jolted him awake, his breath catching in his throat. He immediately sat up, his eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the voice. But there was only a chilling silence. The next day, Jake felt something strange while he was out working in the fields. Suddenly, a nearby cornstalk fell over, though there was no wind. He walked over to pick it up, but when he looked at the ground, he saw a set of footprints that seemed to have been burned into the earth, like someone had been standing there. He couldn't explain where they came from. Panicked, Jake hurried away from the fields and went back home. Later that evening, Ben was sitting in his living room watching TV with all the lights on. Suddenly, the lights went out for no reason. Ben quickly got up to check the circuit breaker, but when the lights flickered back on, he saw the shadow of a person move quickly behind a wall. "Chloe," Ben whispered, but when he turned, no one was there. At the other end of the small town, Ryan was at home in the middle of the night when he heard footsteps outside his house. The steps were slow, but felt unnervingly close. As time went on, the fear consumed all of them. They could no longer ignore what was happening. The four of them began to realize that what they were experiencing wasn't just fear or nightmares, but a real terror. Their secret was now a curse that had bound them together, a curse they couldn't escape. Every night, Chloe's cries became clearer and closer, and they often saw her shadow in the corners of their vision. They knew the spirit would not stop until its revenge was complete. Jake, Ryan, Ben, and Mike could no longer bear the terror. The sounds of Chloe's crying and the strange events that had plagued them lately were constant reminders of their dark secret. They were living under the shadow of a curse. Jake, especially, was trapped in a guilt that he could no longer suppress. That night, Jake decided to go back to the cornfield, to the place where it all began, the place where he and his friends had left Chloe after the assault. With careful steps, Jake made his way to the dark field. The sky was covered with thick clouds, blocking the moonlight. The only sound was the wind rustling the tall corn stalks, which sounded like whispers all around him. Each step felt heavier as he went deeper into the field. He saw a faint light in the distance, but he knew it wasn't a street light or a house. As he got closer, Jake's heart pounded. Though he tried to stay calm, he knew something was waiting for him. Slowly, he went deeper into the cornfield. The burden he carried felt heavier with each step, the fear almost making him collapse. "No, no." Jake tried to whisper, but his voice wouldn't come out. "Chloe, I am..." Before he could finish, a cold hand gripped his shoulder from behind. He spun around quickly, but what he saw wasn't darkness or the night wind. Chloe's face appeared before him, so close it seemed to emerge from the darkness itself. Her empty eyes stared at Jake with a profound hatred. "Why didn't you admit your mistake?" her voice echoed, clear as a whisper that pierced through his fear. Every word she spoke felt like a judgment, a damnation he had to bear. Jake was frozen. All the guilt he had tried to hide for so long now resurfaced, flooding his mind. He wanted to say something, to apologize, to try to explain, but his mouth felt sealed shut. Only the fear that made his heart pound remained. Why did you let me die like that? Why did you hit me? And why did you enjoy my body? I thought you were all my friends. Now, you can't run from this, Jake. You will all die. Chloe's cold, ethereal hands wrapped around Jake's neck, shaking him with incredible force. Jake felt his breath being choked off, his body growing weak, and his vision blurring. He was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. Chloe's spirit had him, and it was a curse he could no longer avoid. Just as his breath was about to run out, she suddenly vanished. Jake fell to the ground, his body trembling as he gasped for air. He still felt the coldness seeping into his body, but now there was a chilling silence. Chloe was gone. Jake looked around. It was only the vast, dark cornfield. It all felt like a terrible nightmare, but he knew what had just happened was real. Chloe had come to him, unleashing her pent-up rage, and now Jake knew he couldn't escape what they all had to face. Ryan, too, was experiencing the same thing. Like his friends, he had tried to move on with his life after the horrific incident in the cornfield, but even as he tried to live his days normally, Chloe's voice, which always echoed in the night, and the strange events happening around them, never truly disappeared. It all felt like a shadow that followed his every step. One evening, after finishing work, Ryan decided to walk home. The path he took was a quiet road he had known since childhood. On either side were trees and fields, and usually there was nothing strange about it. But tonight, an uncomfortable feeling suddenly came over him, a sense that something was following him. Ryan glanced back several times, but there was no one behind him. He tried to shake off his fear and continued walking, but the strange feeling only intensified. Ryan's pace quickened, his heart beginning to pound. There was something in the air, something that felt different, as if he was being watched. He heard footsteps behind him, even though he couldn't see anyone. The fear was consuming him. And then, at the end of the road, Ryan saw a figure that was all too familiar to him. It was Chloe. She was standing in the middle of the road, under the dim moonlight. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with a cold rage. Ryan stopped, unable to look away from her. Chloe just stood there, staring at him with an empty, wrathful expression. "What you did to me." Chloe's voice echoed, but it didn't just come from her. It was a resonant hum that vibrated in Ryan's head, coming from all directions, as if the universe itself was speaking to him with a force he couldn't escape. "Why didn't you tell my parents where my body was?" The voice reverberated through his entire body, into his mind and heart. Ryan felt his legs give out. He was as if bound by an invisible force. His body trembled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Every step he tried to take felt heavy, as if he were walking on sticky sand, trapping him deeper in his fear. Finally, after a few seconds that felt like hours, Ryan's body collapsed to the ground. He couldn't go on. His vision blurred, and Chloe's voice sounded more distant, fading away, though the echo of her words still rang in his head. Once Chloe vanished, the air around him returned to normal, but the cold sweat and trembling in his body remained. He finally managed to stand up and run home. The fear and regret still haunted him. Ryan knew, just like Jake, that he couldn't escape. Chloe was everywhere, demanding justice, and he knew their punishment was far from over. Something much more terrifying was coming to demand their accountability. "Ben, you left me there alone, murdered by all of you, and none of you cared about my suffering. Confess your sins, Ben. You can't run from this. You're already dead. Why are you here?" Ben felt his body grow weaker, his breath shorter, and his mind darker. His guilt was suffocating him, and he couldn't escape. He wanted to scream, to apologize, but the words were stuck in his throat. All he could do was listen and feel the suffering coming from Chloe's spirit. "Admit your mistake in a way that matters," she whispered, and the darkness around Ben grew thicker and colder. "There is no safe place," the air itself seemed to say, and Ben knew that he and his friends would never be able to undo the sins they had committed. But one thing was certain, Chloe would not stop. They had to confess their sins, or they would forever be trapped in a torment without end. After the terrifying experiences they each endured, Jake, Mike, Ryan, and Ben were consumed by a guilt that gnawed at their souls. All the events, from Chloe's voice disturbing their nights to the physical manifestations that haunted their homes, had taken their toll. Jake knew he couldn't run from what had happened any longer. The guilt was suffocating him, and he had to confess everything. That night, Jake decided to go to Chloe's parents' house. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and there was no guarantee they would forgive him, but he had to atone for his sins. He couldn't continue living with the fear that Chloe's spirit was always watching him. With a heavy heart, Jake walked towards Chloe's house. The town, which usually felt safe, now seemed menacing. The path he took felt increasingly desolate, with only the sound of the wind in the dark night. Each step he took felt heavier, like he was carrying a massive weight, but he had to press on, even as fear haunted him. When he arrived in front of Chloe's house, a strange feeling washed over him. The house was silent, dark, as if there was no life inside. But there was something powerful there, an invisible force watching him. Jake felt a sudden chill that made his body tremble. Suddenly, from the darkness, a figure he knew all too well emerged. It was Chloe. He slowly uttered her name, but the words that came out of his throat were barely a whisper. He could only stare at Chloe, who now stood before him with an expression full of hatred. An unspoken guilt crushed him. He wanted to apologize, to confess his sins, but Chloe's voice broke the silence first. "Why have you come now, Jake? Why only now do you want to confess, after I am already dead?" Jake felt choked by her words. He knew this was a moment he couldn't run from. The silence between them was heavy. Jake bowed his head, unable to look into Chloe's eyes any longer. I'm sorry, Chloe. I'm so sorry. I know we were wrong. I know we can't change what happened, but I want to apologize. I can't run anymore, Chloe. I know I have to take responsibility for what happened." But Chloe just stood there, her pale face unmoving. Her eyes were empty, as if looking at something far beyond him. "Why now, Jake? You could only come after I was dead. After you all left me alone in that field. After you took pleasure from my body without any remorse." Jake felt crushed by a guilt so immense it felt like every word from Chloe's mouth was a whip striking his soul. He felt as if his body would shatter from all the regret he had suppressed for so long. "You ignored me, and now I demand accountability. None of you can escape this. You will all pay." Jake collapsed on the lawn in front of the house, feeling an unbearable weight on his shoulders. Tears began to stream down his face. He felt as if Chloe was standing over him, giving him no chance to escape. But even though he was terrified, Jake knew this was his atonement. He had to face this for Chloe, for himself, and for his friends who were also trapped in this curse. "Forgive us. We were wrong. We can't fix anything, but we want to face it," Jake said, his voice choked with sobs. As he began, Jake felt himself being crushed even further. Even though he had tried to confess his sins, the guilt didn't disappear. Every time he closed his eyes, Chloe's face with its empty stare appeared in his mind. When he walked down the street, it felt as if someone was watching him from behind the trees. He felt as if his own shadow was following him, staring at him with the same hatred. The others felt the same way. Every night, they would wake up drenched in a cold sweat. They felt as if the guilt was seeping into every inch of their bodies. One night, they all met at Jake's house. They sat together, looking exhausted and stressed. Their faces were pale, and their eyes were empty, as if they were carrying a burden too heavy to bear. None of them could sleep peacefully, and their fear had reached its peak. "We can't go on like this," Jake said, his voice trembling. "She won't stop. We can't live our lives like this anymore. We ignored her, let her die without anyone caring. Now, we have to face the consequences." "I don't know how long we can last," Ryan replied, his voice strained. "She's everywhere. I see her face in my dreams. I hear her crying. She won't let us go." "I feel it too," Mike added. "This isn't just guilt, it's a curse. We're trapped, and nothing we do will ever be right." Ben was silent, but his face showed the same terror. Fear had turned him into a shadow of his former self. "I feel like we're already damned, like something has marked us. Whatever we do, we'll always be haunted." The four men felt trapped in a curse of their own making. There was no safe place for them. Their lives, once full of laughter, friendship, and freedom, had turned into a living nightmare. They could no longer enjoy simple things because Chloe's shadow was always there. Every second felt heavy. They began to feel that their lives would never be the same again. They had lost the chance to fix everything. Regret flowed through them, but they knew that regret was not enough to erase the sins they had committed. Night after night, they felt more and more isolated, as if an invisible wall was preventing them from moving forward. Their existence in this world felt increasingly futile, and there was nothing that could end their suffering. Trapped in their own minds, every corner, every shadow, and every sound they heard brought them back to that day, the day they denied. They could not escape reality. Their regret was a burden they would have to carry forever. Jake, Mike, Ryan, and Ben gathered, full of anxiety, in a secluded place far from prying eyes. They knew they could no longer live in the fear that haunted their every step. After years of being plagued by guilt and unending terror, they decided to find a way to end their suffering. They tried to find a way to atone for their sins, to escape the destruction that was drawing ever closer. They returned to the cornfield, to Chloe's unmarked grave, hoping to find a way to break the curse. But as they stood there, something strange happened. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble violently, as if the earth itself would not let them stand in peace. The dark skies seemed to grow even darker, and the air felt heavy, as if the universe was holding its breath. Suddenly, from the deepening darkness, a familiar figure emerged. Chloe, with a pale face and empty eyes full of hatred, stood before them. In an instant, the world around them went black. "You have to pay for what you did," Chloe's voice echoed, cold and final. "There is no escape. No one can escape me." They felt crushed by a deep regret, but there was no way out. All their efforts to avoid Chloe, all their attempts to fix their mistakes, felt futile in the face of the risen spirit. Before they could say a word, the ground around them began to move. The hard earth suddenly split open, gaping like a monstrous mouth ready to swallow them whole. They tried to run, but their bodies felt locked in place, trapped by an invisible force. They screamed, but their voices seemed to vanish into the howling night wind. The ground beneath them continued to shake, and in an instant, their bodies began to sink into the open earth. They felt a crushing sensation, as if invisible hands were pulling them down, dragging them into an infinite darkness. "What you did to me will not be forgiven," Chloe's voice echoed again, accompanying their descent into the earth. The sound was like the clanging of metal striking their ears. "I will take you all into my grave, and you will feel the suffering that I felt. No one can save you from this curse." As the earth continued to swallow them, the four men could only feel a deepening regret. They knew, at that moment, that they were truly trapped by a fate they had created, and they knew they would never escape the death that had been stalking them, that had now come to claim its due. A few days after the horrifying events in the cornfield, the townspeople grew anxious about the disappearance of the four young men, Jake, Mike, Ryan, and Ben. They had been well known in the town, and had suddenly vanished without a trace. Their panicked families began to search, but no one knew where they had gone. The atmosphere in the town became tense, and an unspoken fear began to grip everyone. Then, one bright morning, when a few farmers decided to search the cornfield where they usually worked, they found something that could not be explained. In the middle of the dense, dark field, the bodies of the four young men were found partially buried in the earth, in strange positions, as if they were trapped in the embrace of the hard, deep ground. Their faces were pale and frozen in expressions of pure terror, and their bodies were stiff, as if they had been dead for several days. No one knew for sure what had happened, but some people claimed to have heard a woman's laughter at night, an unusual, terrifying laughter full of hatred. They said the sound came from the cornfield, but no one dared to go there after dark. The townspeople could only whisper about the event that had just occurred. The four men, once full of life and laughter, were now nothing more than a dark memory that haunted the town. They could never escape the sins they had committed. The town would forever be remembered for the horror story of Chloe, the girl who would never be forgotten. Her spirit, which never found justice in life, finally found a way to exact its revenge, making every corner of that town feel cold and full of darkness. Even though the bodies of her four friends were found, they were never truly free. A curse would continue to overshadow them, a lesson delivered by Chloe that would never be forgotten by anyone who heard her story. The story ends here. So, what do you all think about this tale? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you to everyone who listened to the end. I hope you all stay healthy, live long, and find happiness and success. And for those of you who just joined us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story. I apologize for any misspoken words. Until next time, stay safe, and don't wander too far into the dark. This is Alex from Whispers in the Dark, signing off.